Imagine driving into a town at midnight and finding out it never existed by morning. That was the thought echoing in Daniel Harper's mind the night everything changed. He had been on the road for nearly 9 hours, exhausted, eyelids heavy from the kind of fatigue that doesn't just dull the senses, it warps them. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through forests so dense they seemed to swallow the moonlight. His GPS had died 2 hours earlier, his phone no longer picking up service, and the last road sign he'd passed pointed toward nothing but farmland and wilderness. Yet out of nowhere, just as the dashboard clock ticked past 12:03 a.m., a glow appeared ahead. It wasn't headlights. It wasn't a gas station. It was a wooden sign, lit by its own strange pale blue luminescence. The paint was cracked and faded, but the words were unmistakable. "Welcome to Ashford." Daniel slowed, staring. He'd driven these back roads many times before on business trips, and he could have sworn there was no town anywhere within 50 miles. But curiosity tugged at him harder than exhaustion, and before he could reconsider, he turned down the narrow lane that curved past the sign. The road led him into a place that shouldn't have been there. Houses lined the streets, old Victorian-style structures with peeling shutters and wide porches. Yellow lamplight glowed in the windows. A diner's neon sign buzzed softly in the distance. There were cars parked along the curb, old models, but well kept, as if the entire town had been frozen in time. His headlights swept across a figure standing on the sidewalk, and for a second Daniel's stomach dropped. A man in a wide-brimmed hat was watching him with unnervingly still posture, like a mannequin waiting to come alive. But when Daniel blinked, the man tipped his hat in a polite, almost mechanical greeting. Daniel parked outside the diner, deciding that coffee, or at least human contact, was the only thing keeping him from falling asleep behind the wheel. The bell over the door jingled as he stepped inside, and instantly every conversation stopped. It wasn't a big place. Half a dozen booths, a long counter with stools, a jukebox humming low in the corner. But all eyes turned to him, a stranger in their midst, and he felt the weight of their stares like a physical pressure. Then, just as quickly, smiles spread across their faces. Too quickly, too rehearsed. "Well now," the waitress said, stepping forward. Her hair was pinned in a 1950s-style bun, her uniform pressed spotless. "Looks like we've got ourselves a traveler. Must be tired. Why don't you sit, hon? Coffee's already on." Daniel hesitated, then slid into a booth near the window. Before he could even look at a menu, the waitress set a steaming mug of coffee and a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. "How did you—" he began, but she cut him off with another smile. "Everyone's hungry when they get here." Her words unsettled him more than comforted. He glanced around. People had returned to their conversations, though every now and then, a pair of eyes darted back to him, studying, measuring. It wasn't hostile. It was worse. It was as though they'd been waiting for him. He forced himself to eat, telling himself he was imagining things, that small towns were just like this, tight-knit, suspicious of outsiders. But then a man in a gray suit at the counter leaned over, lowering his voice. "Best not to stay past sunrise, friend." Daniel froze. The man didn't look at him directly, just stirred his coffee slowly, as though he hadn't spoken at all. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked cautiously. No response. The man's spoon clinked against the mug in steady rhythm, his gaze fixed on nothing. The unease in Daniel's gut deepened. He finished his meal quickly, left a 20 on the table, and stepped outside. The air was strangely warm for midnight, thick with the scent of damp earth and lilacs, though he hadn't seen a single flower on the drive-in. Across the street, a little girl sat on the curb, hugging a ragged teddy bear. Her eyes followed him in a way that made his skin crawl. "You're new," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, but too steady for a child. Daniel forced a chuckle. "Guess so. What's your name?" She tilted her head. "Doesn't matter. You won't remember anyway." His chest tightened. "What do you mean by that?" The girl only smiled, revealing a row of baby teeth too sharp at the edges, and turned her attention back to the teddy bear as if he were already forgotten. Shaken, Daniel returned to his car. He should leave. He knew that much. Something about this town felt wrong in ways he couldn't explain, but exhaustion pinned him in place. His body screamed for rest, and when he spotted a small inn down the block with a flickering vacancy sign, he told himself one night couldn't hurt. Just one night, and he'd be gone by morning. The innkeeper greeted him with an unnervingly bright smile, handing him a brass key before he'd even signed the register. The room was simple: floral wallpaper, a ticking grandfather clock, a bed that smelled faintly of lavender. Daniel collapsed onto the mattress fully clothed, too tired to care. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of the girl's words. "You won't remember anyway." Outside, the town was silent, the streets empty, the lamplight flickering faintly as if fighting against the dark. And as the grandfather clock downstairs began to chime 1, 2, 3 times, the town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something unseen. Daniel falls asleep in the inn, despite warnings not to stay past sunrise. Daniel woke to the sound of silence. Not the normal kind of silence, the comforting hush of an unfamiliar inn at dawn, but an oppressive stillness that pressed against his ears, like cotton stuffed inside his head. He blinked in the dim light of the room, disoriented. The grandfather clock stood across from his bed, its pendulum swinging, but the face was strange. The hands hadn't moved. They both pointed straight at midnight. He sat up, frowning. The air felt heavy, almost damp, clinging to his skin. Pulling back the curtains, he expected to see sunlight bleeding over rooftops. Instead, the streets outside glowed in the same soft lamplight he had seen when he arrived. The sky was dark, the moon still hanging, and a pale mist crept along the cobblestones. His heart quickened. He checked his phone. Dead. No service, no time, just a black screen. When he went downstairs, the lobby was empty, though the desk bell gleamed as though freshly polished. The innkeeper was gone. The door groaned as he pushed it open, stepping out into the street. People were awake, walking the sidewalks, chatting in small groups. Yet none of them carried a phone. None wore watches, and none seemed aware that anything was off. The diner across the street drew him back with the faint smell of frying bacon. He entered cautiously, and again the bell chimed above the door. Just like last night, everyone inside turned their heads in perfect unison to look at him before resuming their conversations. And once more, the waitress was waiting with that spotless smile, setting down coffee and eggs before he could say a word. Daniel slid into the same booth, uneasy. "Do you always serve people before they order?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The waitress didn't answer immediately. She just smiled wider, the corners of her mouth trembling as if holding back something. Finally, she said, "Everyone's hungry when they get here." The exact same phrase as the night before, word for word. He stared at her, and something inside him twisted. Déjà vu, sharper than anything he had ever experienced. Not a vague sense of repetition, no, this was exact. Every gesture, every inflection, every glance around the room was identical to last night. He picked up his fork and deliberately dropped it on the table just to break the rhythm. The sound made heads turn. The conversations faltered. For a second, everyone in the diner just stared. Then, as though a switch had been flipped, the noise resumed. He tried to eat, but the food was cold. Not room temperature cold, icy, as though it had been refrigerated moments before being served. When he pushed the plate away, the man in the gray suit at the counter cleared his throat. Daniel froze, watching. The man stirred his coffee in slow circles, exactly like before. "Best not to stay past sunrise, friend," he murmured again, his tone identical to the previous night. Daniel's blood ran cold. He shoved away from the booth and stormed over. "What does that mean?" he demanded. His voice cracked with a mix of fear and anger. "Why do you keep saying that?" The man finally looked at him. His eyes were milky white, pupils swallowed by cataracts, or maybe something worse. His lips barely moved as he whispered, "Because you never listen." Daniel staggered back, breath caught in his throat. The diner blurred for a moment, the walls seeming to stretch, the light overhead flickering like an old film reel. Then, as suddenly as it came, the distortion vanished. Everything was normal again. People chatted, silverware clinked against plates, and no one paid him any mind. He stumbled outside into the cool air, needing space. The mist still clung to the ground, and the lamps buzzed faintly overhead. Across the street, the little girl was waiting. Same teddy bear in her lap. Same wide, unsettling eyes. "You don't believe me, do you?" she asked softly. Daniel knelt down, heart hammering. "Believe you about what?" "That you'll forget." She hugged the bear tighter. "You always forget, every time, and then it all starts over." His stomach dropped. "What starts over?" She tilted her head. "The town. Us. You. We always come back at night and then we go away at dawn. But you never remember. You're worse than the rest of us because you fight it. You think you're just passing through." The world tilted around him, the ground spinning under his feet. He forced a weak laugh. "Okay, kid, that's enough. You're scaring me." Her small smile didn't waver. "Good. Maybe this time you'll listen." Daniel backed away, his breath ragged. He needed proof, something tangible. He walked the length of Main Street searching, but the town was too clean, too perfect. Every window spotless, every door freshly painted, every lawn neatly trimmed. He didn't see a single grocery store, no gas station, no post office. Only houses, the diner, the inn, and a church whose bell tower loomed like a sentinel. When he tried to leave, the road twisted on itself. He drove for what felt like miles, only to pass the same diner again, the same crooked lamppost, the same little girl with the teddy bear. No matter which turn he took, the town folded back around him, as if it were alive and playing with him. By the time he parked back at the inn, his hands shook so badly he could barely remove the key from the ignition. He sat there staring through the windshield at the silent street when the church bells rang. Not once, not twice, but 12 slow, thunderous chimes that echoed through the empty night. His head snapped toward the church and he saw movement. Figures slipping through the doors, hooded and silent, their shadows stretching unnaturally long across the cobblestones. Every instinct screamed at him to stay away. Yet something deeper, some pull he couldn't explain, drew him forward. As the 12th bell faded, a whisper rose from inside the church. Dozens of voices, chanting in unison, words he couldn't understand, low and guttural, echoing in his chest like vibrations from the earth itself. The little girl's voice rang out behind him, quiet but piercing. "Don't fall asleep this time." Daniel turned, but she was gone. Only her teddy bear sat on the curb staring at him with button eyes. Daniel hears the church bells tolling and the townsfolk chanting inside, as the girl warns him not to fall asleep. The chanting pulled at Daniel like a magnet. He told himself to turn back, to get in his car and leave, but his feet moved anyway. Each step toward the church felt heavier, as though the mist itself was thickening around his legs, urging him forward. The street lamps flickered, buzzing faintly, and for a moment the shadows of the hooded figures seemed to stretch upward along the walls of the church like twisted roots. The doors were open just wide enough to let the glow of candlelight spill out. Daniel approached cautiously, his heart pounding, and peered inside. What he saw froze him in place. The church was filled with townsfolk, dozens of them, maybe everyone he had seen since arriving. The waitress, the man in the gray suit, the innkeeper, even the little girl, all stood in a perfect circle around the altar. Candles burned in their hands, the flames oddly still, not flickering despite the draft that hissed through the open doorway. Their faces were calm, serene, almost vacant, and from their lips poured the same chant in low, rhythmic unison. Daniel strained to understand the words, but the language was foreign, harsh, guttural, with syllables that seemed to scrape against the inside of his skull. The sound wasn't just heard, it was felt, reverberating in his chest like the hum of distant machinery. At the center of the circle stood the preacher, At least, that's what Daniel thought he must be. Tall, skeletal, his face lost in shadow beneath a hood, he held a great brass bell in his hands. When the last of the 12 chimes from the tower faded, he raised the bell high. The chanting ceased. The silence that followed was so sudden and so absolute that Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Then, in a voice like gravel grinding against stone, the preacher spoke. "Stay awake, stay alive." The congregation repeated in unison, "Stay awake, stay alive." The phrase echoed in Daniel's mind like a warning, yet none of them looked afraid. Their eyes, wide and unblinking, stared straight ahead, as though fixed on something Daniel couldn't see. He wanted to back away, to retreat into the shadows before anyone noticed him. But the little girl turned her head slowly, as though she'd known all along he was watching. Their eyes met, and she smiled. "Come inside, Daniel," she called softly. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the silence with unnatural clarity. The congregation turned as one to face him. Dozens of eyes, shining in the candlelight, locked on him. He felt the air grow heavier, pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. His instincts screamed to run, but his body betrayed him. One step forward, then another. Soon he was standing just inside the doorway, the wood groaning beneath his weight. The door slammed shut behind him of its own accord, and the sound echoed like a gunshot through the vaulted chamber. The preacher lifted the bell again, and the congregation resumed their chant. Louder now. Faster. The words tumbled over one another, building in intensity until the sound became a storm that rattled the pews and shook the stained glass windows. Daniel clutched his ears, but the sound seemed to bypass them entirely, vibrating directly inside his skull. He staggered forward, falling to his knees at the edge of the circle. The little girl stepped out from the others and placed her teddy bear in his lap, her expression strangely kind. "Don't fall asleep," she whispered again. The preacher lowered the bell. The chanting stopped. Every eye in the church was on Daniel. Then, in perfect unison, the congregation said, "He forgets. Every time." Daniel's heart lurched. He tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse. "What do you mean?" The preacher extended a bony hand toward him, and Daniel felt himself being lifted, not physically, but as though his very mind was being pulled upward and outward. His vision blurred, the world tilting violently. The candles bent like reeds in a storm, their flames stretching upward into unnatural shapes. The chanting resumed, but now he could almost recognize the words as though a veil had been pulled away from his ears. Awake at night, alive in dark. Sleep at dawn, the soul departs. The phrase repeated again and again until Daniel's eyelids grew impossibly heavy. He fought it, shaking his head, digging his nails into his palms. Every fiber of his being told him not to give in. Yet the weight of exhaustion was overwhelming. He hadn't realized how tired he still was, how his bones ached with weariness. The little girl leaned close, her voice barely a breath. "If you sleep, you'll forget again." His eyes fluttered shut. The chanting swelled. The bell rang once, twice, 3 times, the sound shattering through him like glass. And then, nothing. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was lying in his car, engine off, parked on the shoulder of an empty highway. The church, the town, the people, all gone. Only the woods surrounded him, silent and dark. His dashboard clock read 7:01 a.m. He sat up, panic clawing at his chest. Had it all been a dream? No. He could still smell the candle wax on his clothes. He could still feel the rough fabric of the teddy bear under his fingertips, except when he looked down, his lap was empty. The seat beside him held no bag, no phone. Only a single object rested there, small and worn, a brass key on a tarnished ring. The number etched into it made his blood run cold. Room 6. Daniel sat frozen in the driver's seat, the brass key digging into his palm as though to remind him it was real. The woods around him were utterly still, the kind of stillness that doesn't belong to morning, but to something unnatural, something that watches and waits. He turned the key over and over, tracing the number 6 etched into the metal. He remembered the room, the floral wallpaper, the lavender-scented sheets. He remembered falling asleep there. Yet here he was, on the side of a road with no town in sight. He started the engine and drove, desperate to find some landmark, some sign of civilization. The trees swallowed the road for miles until finally, a police cruiser appeared ahead, parked on the shoulder. Relief surged through him. He pulled up behind it, stepped out, and waved to the officer standing near the hood. "Morning," Daniel said, his voice trembling with exhaustion. "Listen, I need to report something strange. There's a town nearby, Ashford. I was there last night, but it's gone. I mean it. Completely gone. I think something's happening there." The officer squinted at him, adjusting his hat. "Ashford," he repeated, the word tasting unfamiliar on his tongue. "Yes," Daniel insisted. "Population maybe a few hundred. Old Victorian houses, a diner, a church with a bell tower. Ring any bells?" He laughed nervously at his own unintended pun, but the officer didn't smile. "There's no town called Ashford anywhere in this county," the officer said flatly. Daniel blinked. "What? That's impossible. I was there last night. Look." He held up the brass key, thrusting it forward as proof. "This is from the inn, room 6. The officer studied it, then shook his head. "Never seen it before." "Sir, are you sure you didn't fall asleep at the wheel and dream all this?" Frustration bubbled up, hot and raw. "I know what I saw. There were people there, they talked to me, they knew me." His voice cracked, desperation seeping through. "A little girl said I'd forget, but I didn't. I remember. I remember everything." The officer's expression softened slightly, but not in a comforting way, more in the way someone looks at a man who's lost his grip on reality. "Maybe you should get some rest," he said carefully. "There's a motel about 10 miles down this road. I'll radio ahead. Let them know you're coming." Daniel wanted to scream, to shake the man until he understood, but instead, he nodded stiffly, climbed back into his car, and drove on. The motel was a squat, low building with a faded sign and peeling paint. He parked, checked in, and collapsed onto the bed without even undressing. For hours, he lay staring at the ceiling, the brass key clutched in his hand. He couldn't shake the memory of the chant, the preacher's words, the way the congregation had turned to him in unison. Stay awake. Stay alive. That night, long after the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel found himself back on the road. He hadn't meant to go, hadn't planned it, but something inside him pulled toward the woods, the same way a moth is pulled to flame. His headlights cut through the darkness, and before long, there it was again. The glowing wooden sign. "Welcome to Ashford." His breath caught in his throat. The town was back. He slowed, pulling into the same narrow lane, and there it was. Houses lit warmly, lampposts glowing, the diner's neon buzzing in the distance. The same man in the wide-brimmed hat stood on the sidewalk, tipping it politely. Déjà vu washed over Daniel like a cold wave, stronger this time, suffocating in its familiarity. He parked in front of the diner again. The bell jingled as he stepped inside, and every head turned, just as before. The waitress smiled, setting down coffee and eggs before he sat. The man in the gray suit stirred his drink. The little girl hugged her teddy bear by the window. "Best not to stay past sunrise, friend," the man muttered. Daniel sank into the booth, heart hammering. "This can't be happening," he whispered. But it was. Every detail, every motion, identical to the night before. Except now he noticed small differences. Hairline cracks in the facade. The waitress's smile twitched, held too long. The neon sign outside flickered in a stutter, repeating the same buzz like a broken record. The coffee in his mug was already cold, frost creeping along the rim. He pushed the cup away, standing abruptly. "I know what this is," he said louder than he intended, his voice echoing in the diner. You're all stuck in some kind of loop. And you think I'm stuck with you. But I'm not. I don't belong here. The room went silent. Every head turned to him in perfect unison, eyes blank, smiles gone. The little girl tilted her head, her teddy bear dangling at her side. "You've always belonged here," she said softly. Daniel's breath caught. "No, that's not true." But even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. Why did the town feel so familiar? Why did the people know his name when he hadn't told them? Why did the girl's warning ring in his ears like a memory instead of a prophecy? He stumbled back out onto the street, desperate to escape. He climbed into his car and slammed the door, hands trembling as he turned the key. The engine roared to life. He pressed the gas, barreling down the road out of town. But after 10 minutes, the diner appeared in his headlights again. The same crooked lamppost. The same little girl with the teddy bear. "No," he whispered, sweat dripping down his temples. He pressed harder on the gas, swerving around corners, trying every possible route. But every turn led him back to the center of town. Finally, he skidded to a stop in front of the church. The bell tower loomed above him, its silhouette cutting against the night sky like a jagged blade. The doors stood open, faint candlelight flickering inside. And from within came the low murmur of chanting. He stumbled toward it, clutching the brass key in his fist so tightly it cut into his palm. He didn't want to go in. He didn't want to hear those voices again. But something deeper than fear dragged him forward. The little girl's voice carried through the night, soft and steady, though she was nowhere in sight. "Don't fight it, Daniel. You never win." The church doors creaked as he stepped inside. The church smelled of smoke and old wood, the kind of scent that lingers in places untouched by time. Daniel stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath his weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed atmosphere. Candles lined the pews, dripping wax onto the worn wood, their flames dancing though there was no draft. At the front of the church, the congregation sat perfectly still, their backs straight, their heads bowed in eerie synchronization. At first, he thought they hadn't noticed him. Then, as if controlled by a single hidden string, they lifted their heads in unison. Dozens of eyes fixed on him. Eyes that did not blink, did not waver, did not seem fully human. A cold ripple passed through Daniel's body. He wanted to run, but his legs betrayed him. His feet carried him forward, step by reluctant step, toward the altar. The preacher stood waiting. His face was gaunt, hollowed by shadows that the candlelight could not quite erase. His eyes gleamed with a strange mixture of pity and hunger, as though he'd been expecting Daniel for longer than Daniel could comprehend. "Welcome home," the preacher said softly, voice heavy with something that felt older than the town itself. Daniel's throat tightened. "I'm not from here. I don't belong here," he whispered, though the words lacked conviction now. The preacher tilted his head almost sadly. "That's what you always say. Every night you deny. Every night you resist. And every dawn, you forget." The words struck like a hammer blow. Daniel staggered back, clutching the brass key like a lifeline. His mind fought against them, but somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the surface, there was recognition. A faint, terrifying familiarity that he couldn't explain. "No," he hissed. "That's not possible." The little girl stepped out from the pews then, teddy bear dangling from her hand, her eyes too knowing for her age. She walked toward him, calm and unafraid. "You always fight it," she said gently, her voice echoing far louder than it should. "But you can't change it. We're all stuck. You, me, everyone. This town is the loop, and you are part of it." Her words carved ice into his veins. He wanted to scream at her, tell her she was wrong. But his memory betrayed him. Flashes of nights he couldn't recall fully. Faces blurring, conversations repeating, footsteps retracing paths he had walked before, spilled into his mind like broken fragments of glass. He had been here. He had always been here. The preacher raised his hand and the congregation began to chant. The words were low, guttural, rising and falling like waves crashing against a shore he could not see. The air grew heavy, pressing down on him, suffocating, as though the walls of the church leaned closer with every syllable. Daniel clutched his head, the sound drilling into his skull. "Stop it!" he shouted. "Just stop!" But the chanting only grew louder. The flames of the candles stretched unnaturally tall, bending as if drawn toward him. The brass key burned in his palm, searing hot until he dropped it with a cry. It clattered on the stone floor, spinning in a slow circle before coming to rest, pointing directly at him. The little girl crouched to pick it up. She held it out to him with both hands, her expression solemn. "Room 6, she whispered. "It's always room 6. That's where you wake. That's where you sleep. That's where it resets." His chest heaved, lungs burning as though the air had turned to ash. He tried to back away, but the doors of the church slammed shut behind him, sealing him in. The chanting swelled, vibrating through the walls, through his bones, until it was the only thing he could hear. He fell to his knees, vision blurring. Images poured into his mind, unstoppable now. He saw himself in room 6 over and over, hundreds of times. He saw the key in his hand, the same moment repeating endlessly. He saw the town vanish at dawn, the road stretching into emptiness, the woods swallowing everything. And then he saw himself, smiling, greeting newcomers as they stumbled into Ashford, just as lost and terrified as he was now. "No." His voice cracked, barely audible. "That can't be me. That's not me." The preacher stepped closer, kneeling so his face was level with Daniel's. His breath smelled of earth, old and damp, like a grave freshly opened. "It is you. You are Ashford's keeper, though you never remember it. By dawn, your mind resets, and you return to the road. You wander, you discover, you resist, and then you forget again. This is your curse, Daniel. This is your eternity." Daniel shook his head violently, tears burning his eyes. "Why? Why me? What did I do?" The preacher's smile was thin, cruel. "You wanted to escape death. Once, long ago, you begged for another chance, another night, another day, and Ashford answered. But bargains with eternity are never free." The little girl pressed the key into his shaking hand. Her tiny fingers were cold as ice. "It's almost dawn," she whispered. "Time to forget again." Through the high windows of the church, Daniel saw the faintest sliver of gray light touch the sky. His heart thundered as panic surged through him. "No, not again. I don't want to forget," he screamed, clinging to the key as though it could anchor him. But already, the chanting faded. Already the congregation blurred before his eyes, their faces dissolving into mist. The church walls stretched and melted into shadow. His body grew heavy, his mind clouding. The last thing he heard was the little girl's voice, soft and inevitable. "You'll be back. You always come back." And then, darkness. Daniel awoke with a sharp gasp, lungs burning as though he had been drowning. His hands shot out, searching for something solid, something real. His palm struck the edge of a wooden nightstand. A lamp toppled, crashing to the floor, but the sound was muffled, distant, like it was happening in another room. When his vision cleared, his stomach dropped. He was in room 6. Again. The curtains were drawn, but a faint blue-gray light seeped in around the edges, soft and cold, the light of a sky just before dawn. His chest tightened with terror. He had sworn, he had promised himself, he would not wake up here again. Yet here he was, as though the night had never happened, as though all of it had been nothing more than a fevered nightmare. The brass key lay on the nightstand beside him, its surface polished clean, no trace of the burn that had seared his hand only hours earlier. His clothes were neatly folded at the foot of the bed, his shoes aligned perfectly on the floor. It was as if someone had prepared everything for him, expecting his arrival. "No," he whispered, clutching his head. His mind was fraying, reality unraveling thread by thread. He remembered the church, the chanting, the little girl's cold hand pressing the key into his palm. He remembered the preacher's voice telling him he was the town's keeper, bound here by some ancient bargain. And yet, already the details were slipping. Already the edges of memory were blurring, like words erased from a chalkboard. The door creaked. Daniel froze, heart hammering, as it slowly swung open. The little girl stood in the doorway, teddy bear tucked under her arm, her eyes impossibly old for her small frame. "It's almost time," she said softly. He staggered to his feet. "No, not again. I won't forget this time. I'll fight it." His voice cracked, desperation bleeding into every word. She tilted her head, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "You've said that before. Every night, you fight, and every morning you forget." Daniel lunged toward her, grabbing her shoulders. "Tell me how to stop it. Tell me how to break this." His grip tightened until he realized her body felt wrong. Too light, too hollow, like clutching a scarecrow stuffed with ash. He released her instantly, stepping back in horror. Her smile widened, but her eyes remained sorrowful. "You can't. Ashford owns you now. The bargain was sealed long ago. You traded your death for eternity. But eternity has teeth." He shook his head, trying to force clarity into his unraveling thoughts. "No, there has to be a way out. If I made a bargain, I can undo it. I just need to remember how." The girl's expression flickered. Pity, then resignation. "If you really remembered, you wouldn't want to escape. That's the part you never see. That's the part you're not supposed to know." Daniel staggered back against the wall, breath coming in ragged bursts. "What do you mean?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You were the first, the one who begged for Ashford to live, the one who brought us all here." The words crashed into him like a tidal wave. His mind recoiled, tried to reject them, but fragments surfaced, unstoppable. Faces, so many faces, smiling, then screaming, then vanishing in smoke. His own hands signing something in blood. His own voice whispering, "Let this place never die. Let it always return." He had not stumbled into Ashford by accident. He had created it. His knees buckled. He fell onto the bed, staring blankly at the brass key. It gleamed in the dim light, mocking him with its familiarity. The curse wasn't something placed upon him. It was something he had chosen. He had bound himself here, along with everyone else, to keep death at bay. And now the town fed on them all, resetting, devouring, repeating for eternity. The girl's voice broke the silence. "You wanted to be remembered forever, but forever remembers differently than you think." Daniel pressed his hands to his face, fighting the scream clawing its way up his throat. He didn't want to believe it. He couldn't. Yet every fragment of memory that returned only confirmed the truth. He was not a victim of Ashford. He was its architect. The light outside the window grew brighter. Dawn was coming. Panic surged in his veins. He leapt to his feet, clutching the key so hard the edges cut into his palm. "No, not this time. I won't forget. I won't let it reset again." The walls trembled. The air shimmered like heat rising from asphalt. The room itself seemed to sigh, as though amused by his defiance. He hurled the key across the room, shattering the mirror above the dresser. Glass exploded outward, shards raining to the floor. For the briefest instant, before the pieces scattered, the reflection staring back at him was not his own. It was hollow-eyed, ancient, a face twisted by centuries of guilt and hunger, a face that smiled knowingly. Daniel fell back, his body trembling. He scrambled toward the window, ripped open the curtains, and screamed as the first beam of sunlight pierced the glass. White light flooded the room. The world tilted, dissolved. His body grew weightless, his mind slipping into the void. He tried to hold on, tried to carve his name, his face, his guilt into the core of his memory, but it all unraveled like smoke. and in the fading echoes of his mind he heard the preacher's voice one last time, soft and merciless. "You are Ashford, and Ashford is forever." Then came the silence of morning. The hum of the engine filled the silence. Daniel blinked, disoriented, as the blurred world came into focus around him. His hands gripped the steering wheel, though he couldn't remember starting the car. The highway stretched ahead, empty, endless, lined with skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. He shook his head violently, trying to hold on to something, anything from the night before. There had been a church, candles, chanting, a little girl with eyes far too old, and a truth too heavy for his mind to carry. But already it was slipping. Already, the fragments scattered like leaves in a storm. His stomach twisted as he glanced to the passenger seat. A brass key rested there, gleaming faintly in the early morning light. Its number was etched deep into the metal. 6. He didn't know why, but the sight of it made his chest tighten with inexplicable dread. He reached out, fingers trembling, then snatched his hand back as if burned. "What the hell is happening to me?" he whispered. The woods pressed close on either side of the road. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw rooftops through the trees, shadows of chimneys, the suggestion of a church spire. But when he blinked, the image was gone. The road was empty once more. His eyelids grew heavy. Exhaustion weighed on him, thick and unnatural, like a drug pulling him under. He rolled down the window, letting the chill air slap against his face, but it did little to keep him awake. The rhythm of the engine became a lullaby. Up ahead, a sign loomed at the roadside. Its paint was faded, its letters chipped. But Daniel squinted through the blur of sleep and made out the words, "Welcome to Ashford, population 612. A jolt of recognition shuddered through him. His heart slammed against his ribs. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "I've been here before. I know this place." But the moment he said it, the thought unraveled, slipping from his mind like water through his fingers. The certainty faded, leaving only a hollow unease he couldn't explain. The road bent sharply, and there, rising through the mist, was a town. Ashford. Its lights glowed faintly, warm and inviting, spilling across the cobblestone streets. The spire of the church pierced the horizon, its bells silent in the gray dawn. A gas station stood on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering. Daniel slowed the car, staring with wide eyes. Relief washed over him like cool water. A town. Civilization. A place to rest. He pulled into the gas station, parking beneath the buzzing light. The attendant stood behind the counter inside, staring at him with a polite, expectant smile. As Daniel pushed open the car door and stepped out, his legs nearly buckled with fatigue. He swore he could hear whispers in the wind, faint, familiar voices calling from the shadows of the buildings. The brass key lay heavy in his pocket. He didn't remember putting it there. The little girl was standing by the pumps, her teddy bear clutched in one hand. She looked up at him with that same unreadable expression, half pity, half inevitability. "Welcome back," she said softly. Daniel froze. "Back?" His voice cracked. "What do you mean, back? I've never..." But the lie fell flat, even to his own ears. Something deep inside him stirred, a truth he could almost grasp, then lost again in the haze of exhaustion. The girl tilted her head, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "You always say that. Every time." The world seemed to hold its breath. The silence pressed in. The gas station lights flickered, and for the briefest instant, Daniel saw the town blink, like the image of it was projected on a screen, flickering before vanishing into static. And then it was whole again. The buildings solid, the lights warm, the smell of fresh bread and coffee drifting faintly on the air. Daniel swallowed hard, the words trembling out of him. "What happens here? What's wrong with this place?" The girl's eyes glistened, too dark, too deep. "It isn't the town that disappears, Daniel." She stepped closer, voice barely a whisper now. "It's you." The brass key in his pocket burned like fire. His breath caught, the memory tearing through him like shattered glass. Room 6. The preacher's voice. The bargain he had made. He felt the edges of it. The enormity. The guilt. But it was too much. His mind recoiled, snapping shut like a trap. And just like that, it was gone. Daniel blinked, disoriented once more. He looked around at the quiet streets, at the friendly neon sign buzzing overhead, at the gas station attendant waving at him with a cheerful nod. Relief bloomed in his chest. A town, civilization, a place to rest. He didn't notice the little girl slip back into the shadows, her teddy bear swinging limply at her side. He didn't hear her whisper into the wind. He forgets. Every time. The church bell tolled once in the distance, though no one else seemed to hear it. And as the sun crested the horizon, painting Ashford in golden light, Daniel smiled faintly, not knowing why. He climbed back into his car, unaware that night would come again, that the cycle would repeat, that he would rediscover the town at midnight only to vanish with it at dawn. Unaware that the nightmare was his own design, unaware that he would never, ever leave. The hook promised a town that vanishes at dawn, but the truth is darker. The town does not disappear. Daniel himself resets every morning, cursed to forget that he created Ashford and trapped himself in the eternal loop.